Welcome, everyone. This is kind of exciting, but a little nerve-wracking too, because we're in this new, beautiful location, and we're usually, in Celebration Cinema, which we love, but this is kind of a little intimidating out here, seeing these nice, comfy chairs and this huge screen, and then I'm on stage with some of the smartest men that I know. So, but I think it's going to be a great night, and I appreciate you guys all coming out tonight. This is going to be video recorded, so we're really excited about that too, that we can offer this, our discussion, to our friends and followers. So I'm Bonnie Woodrick, the founder of I Understand, a nonprofit organization that supports those that have lost a loved one to death by suicide or are living with a mental brain health illness. This is our second discussion series of the year. We usually do 3, maybe 4, just to focus on one topic so we can bring understanding to perhaps a difficult or controversial or confusing topic, which may be similar to what's going to go on tonight for some. So one of the things that I have done is created a definition petition. And the definition petition is one of my biggest passions because it's about changing the views and narratives surrounding suicide and mental health. I have a petition to change the definition of suicide from one who intentionally kills themselves to an effect of a mental brain health illness or pain. I prefer to talk about the illness rather than the act. So by changing that conversation, I can say, my husband died of depression. And we can talk about the illness rather than the act. We can talk about the signs and the symptoms rather than the act itself, because the act itself is what is so judged and discriminating. So with the petition, I asked some questions. The question is, a couple of the questions, maybe the panelists can answer them here tonight, but why is the brain the only organ in our body that is judged and stigmatized when it fails? Is our brain perfect? If my husband didn't choose depression, then how could he choose his death? If there were 3 generations of suicide before him, shouldn't we be talking more about the genetic components that are involved? And why do we talk more about the act than we do the illness? The most commonly asked question after a suicide death is, how did they do it? That brings me back to that trauma, back to the day that I got PTSD and still have a hard time 19 years later opening a white door. These are the things that we need to talk about, that we need to change, because if we do talk about mental health suicide more accurately and updated, I think so much of the judgment and stigma is going to go away. And that's what I hope to accomplish here today with these 3. So our expert panel here are 3 of the people that I know personally, and I am so honored to be in their presence. I have learned from each one of them. I have somewhat of a personal relationship with each one. I'm going to start with Martin. I was speaking at an event one afternoon, and I'm in a hurry to get to another event, and out comes Martin running after me. I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you. We have to meet. We have to meet for coffee. Well, we met for lunch, and I think we became fast friends. And it is because of Martin that we're here tonight, because he wanted to bring this conversation to the forefront, and I really appreciate that. But besides that, Martin is an author, an entrepreneur, an executive assistant at Excel Church. He worked at a local psychiatric hospital while at the same time completing his bachelor degree in ministry leadership from Cornerstone University. Martin learned that theologians specializing in spiritual care and mental health practitioners specializing in mental health care oftentimes treat people the same, but may hold different physiological, some of these words are really hard for me. They're long, philosophical views and methods of practice which set them at odds with one another, which is really why we're here tonight. And Martin set out to bridge the gap to the two parties. So thank you, Martin, and welcome. Trevor Thompson, it's so good to see you here. So Trevor, I really appreciate Trevor because he is my acquisition editor at Erdman's Publishing. And Trevor was one of the first, he really believed in my words and what I was saying and what I was trying to do. And he just so took so much time in helping me through that project. And now the book, to me, is successful. And so much of it is because of Trevor and his position in many different areas with Erdman's and outside of Erdman's. So Trevor is a senior acquisition editor at Erdman's Publishing Company. He has taught at the University of Chicago Divinity School as a lecturer of Koine, Greek, at Abilene Christian University, and now at Calvin University. Trevor is a co-translator of Galen's On the Avoidance of Grief and the author of over 70 encyclopedia articles. He is co-creator of 2 volumes. What 2 volumes are they?
I believe it is on personhood and antiquity,
Okay.
And the other one is on Ephesus as a religious center in the Greco-Roman world.
Yes. And then we have Dr. Eric Atches. I have just been an admirer of Eric for many, many years. My old nanny used to work for you, and she was, you gotta meet Dr. Atches, you gotta meet Dr. Atches. And I finally had the privilege to speak with him, and I don't even know if you remember this, at Michigan State University College of Human Medicine, probably 8 years ago. And at that time, I really understood why I was supposed to meet him. He is believes in our work. He's also a board member, has validated my definition petition and adding pain, and to have the caliber of Dr. Atches support my work means so much, so thank you. But Dr. Eric Atches is a professor and chair of the Department of Psychiatry. Why can I say that? At the Western Michigan University Holmes Stryker MD School of Medicine. He is the former president of the Michigan Psychiatric Society and is a distinguished fellow of the American Psychiatric Association. I love this. He was named Physician of the Year by NAMI, Michigan, in 2022. And he is a graduate of Calvin College, and his parents served as missionaries in the 1970s. So welcome all of you. Like I said, it's an honor to have them here. So now that those hard words are done, and even not so hard done, I just want to give a little brief introduction to what we're going to talk about tonight. So I understand being based on the lived experience and talking to probably for over the last 10 years to thousands of different people and getting opinions and advice and things that were hurtful and things that were helpful. One of the most devastating things that were said to me shortly after my husband died was, your husband went to hell for killing himself. I didn't know how to react to that. And it really wasn't all these years later, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, Trevor was able to explain that to me in a way that I really understood it, and I was able to take that away because I knew that my God would never send a good person to hell, right? So the conflict, though, is twofold, because the second conflict is when the church believes the above statement and shares the inappropriate words with the congregation, or you will not think about or try the act because you don't want to go to hell, right? So we have 2 different, I was told my husband went to hell. I didn't believe that. But then others are being saved because they don't want to go to hell. So on with the questions. We're first going to start with Martin. And I'm gonna ask all 3 of you the same question first, just to get started on bridging the gap conversation. What do you believe the biggest gap between mental health and religion in the community that you serve?
Yeah, I think that it's the idea that there has to be a gap, in the sense that, when we think about mental health and science and, research and so on and so forth, and we think about religion or faith, it seems like these are two separate worlds. And the idea that you have to separate those two worlds and that you can't have a relationship between those two worlds. You can't be a strong person of faith and also be a strongly intellectual and reasonable person at the same time. You can't be a strong person of faith and also, you know, believe in the science that we have with mental health and so on and so forth. So the idea that those two are fighting one another, for me personally, I think that therein lies the biggest gap.
Thank you. Trevor?
Yeah, I would second that in that there is a gap in part because, I mean, I'll speak from within the Christian tradition, one of the so-called desert or revelatory faiths, that there's a set of sacred texts that emerge in a particular place and in a particular time, and there is a gap of time and space between then and now, and how you navigate an ancient text in a modern context can be tricky and requires some careful thought and nuance. In terms of communities of faith, there's one of the biggest problems that I see and encounter as I teach students or talk to others is a failure of understanding kind of where your kind of role is, and that is that clergy people have a particular role, but they don't possess the skill set of a psychiatrist, and whenever that gets confused, there can be problems. That there's someone who's really beyond the ability or the scope or the understanding of a clergy person, and they assume because of that role in the religious community that they can solve all the problems, and they don't effectively refer to others, and maybe that's a natural segue to refer to the psychiatrist. So.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with those same thoughts. You know, I think there's been a perception that science and maybe religion have been at odds for a long time, and you can look at things like one of the sacred texts, the Bible will sometimes talk about things like, okay, we're going to bring the gospel to the four corners of the earth. And so then everybody thought that the world had to be flat if it had four corners. And we subsequently, of course, learned that our world is round. So then, well, which one is right? You know, is that sacred text right, or are the observations that we're making about this world from a scientific perspective correct? And so I think we just have to think about, what are the areas of expertise for both of those domains? And for a person of faith, those sacred texts bring a certain type of knowledge and importance, but they may or may not have as much to say about certain scientific principles. And they're not meant to. So they're meant to be complementary. And I think that's how I think about that gap. They both have a lot of value to add, but perhaps in complementary ways rather than in conflictual ways.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So based on the conflicts that we've experienced as an organization with people that have lost, is there anything in the Bible, and I'll start with you, Trevor, that tells us that our loved one goes to hell if they die by suicide, if they kill themselves, if they commit, if they take their own lives? Those are all languages that we don't use, but most do.
Right. The short answer is no. I mean, you're not going to be able to point to a specific text that teaches that idea. I mean, the most famous death by suicide that most people know that are familiar with the Bible is the death of Judas, which is described in two different texts, which are a little different. The actual outcome of Judas eternally is a bit unknown. I think there is some confusion when people say that if a loved one dies by suicide, they are, just as a matter of fact and without question, going to hell to be eternally punished. That they're actually confusing and distorting a doctrine of the Catholic Church, which differentiates among sins, and that is they're grouping it in a sin of so-called mortal sins, and mortal sins have certain qualifications. but someone who actually knows the official church doctrine, is not just kind of reciting it or repeating a popular version of it, knows that one of the steps of committing a mortal sin, if you do commit it, is being sort of fully aware of what you're doing when you commit that act, that particular mortal sin. And so most with a nuanced understanding of mental health problems today would say, well, if someone reaches that point and suicide is the outcome of their struggle with mental health, they're probably not going to qualify under the church's statute of being fully alert and aware and of sound mind, those sort of kind of categories. And so, I mean, the short answer that I tell people is that, you know, if someone says, my church says that if someone dies by suicide or from suicide, that they go to hell, is to one, clarify for them, that seems to me a distortion of a longstanding doctrine, and then two, to kind of help them understand what that doctrine is, so they can get a better appreciation for it.
Well, and at times, I think that some churches, they believe that, and then they preach it, and they will even say at memorial service that this person went to hell. How do you handle that in your congregation at your church?
Well, first of all, I think that is mind-bogglingly inaccurate, and it's just so ridiculous to say such a thing. Number one, on a couple different levels. Number one, it's inconsiderate to say that to somebody and to say that to their survivors after they have lost somebody due to suicide. It's inconsiderate. It's the last thing anybody wants to hear. It's like adding salt upon a wound. So it's inaccurate on that level, and then it's inaccurate too because, like Trevor said, it's just not. Where in the Bible can you show one scripture of somebody going to hell by suicide, because of suicide? And you can't do that. And I think that this points to a topic whereby throughout history, religion has been known, unfortunately, it's an unfortunate dilemma. It's unfortunate that religion has created these ideologies and these holy cows, is what we like to call them. I'm sure you've heard of the term before. These sacred cows that we have just adopted and accepted and just say, yeah, this is the way things are, but you can't find scriptural basis to prove them. So I think that it's just inaccurate, number one, because it's not right to be said. And then number two, there's nowhere in the scripture that you can point to testify to that fact. And these are just religious ideologies that have been perpetuated over time. It's just wrong. So this is why we have the responsibility to do our own studies, to learn on our own time, to read the Bible for ourselves if that's the path that you so choose to live your life, so that you can understand for yourself, what the faith is really saying, not just accepting what somebody else is saying just because they're saying it, right? So that's what I always like to advocate to people as well.
Okay. I'm going to go back to Trevor a second, because you explained to me one time when I had an issue with an article that somebody had given to me about suicide death. And you said, Bonnie, what people will do, authors, theologians, will take a thread from the Bible and make an entire blanket out of it. Can you explain that concept? Because I think it goes really well with what Martin was just saying.
Sure. I mean, in the biblical text, talking specifically about the Bible among the sacred texts of different religions, it does not discuss every possibility of any facet of life. And there are many questions that you can approach a sacred text, and you can ask the text, well, what about this, or what about that? And the text may or may not be prepared to do that, so often people will grab a verse or a chapter or whatever, and then they will construct a world from it. And not to go too far down a rabbit hole here, but the character of Satan, which is a popular character and is sometimes blamed in mental health crises, the Bible is overwhelmingly silent about how Satan becomes Satan, but there are certain texts that are picked to construct this kind of blanket of who Satan is, if you actually start looking at it, you're like, well, that's really not about that, and that one's not about that, and so you don't really know. And so it's really just a matter of being careful with which text you're selecting to bring to bear on a certain topic, and then not constructing an entire world out of that. Another kind of common example is the proverb that if you bring up, raise up a child in the way in which they should go. When they grow old, they won't depart from it. And that gives a lot of parents concern because they have children who grow up and don't live the life that they want, to live. And so this entire world gets created that from this one text that, well, if I was a good parent, then my son or my daughter would be doing what I wanted them to do. When in fact, it's one verse, it's a proverb, which is a general truism that's not a promise. And so if you construct a blanket from that verse, then you can end up feeling about yourself and about your child in ways that you shouldn't. And so sensitivity to context, sensitivity to the fact that the Bible simply may not answer the question that you're asking, sensitivity to the genre, all of those things are important before you start constructing elaborate networks that can bring harm.
Mm-hmm. So it really comes down to perception, your own personal perception of what you're reading in the Bible, or these articles, that people will take that one thing and make it much bigger than what it really is written in the Bible.
Yeah, I sometimes ask students, have you ever had a closed Bible and just said, open up to hope? And the Bible flop open to the hope chapter. It doesn't do that. This is not Harry Potter or something. In other words, that anytime someone chooses to engage a sacred text, they are going to have to open the text and choose which verse, which chapter is going to bear on the question. And so there's inherently a human element in that. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I would wish it were different, but that...
Yeah.
At least my Bible has never just plopped open to the verse without me actually guiding it a bit. Maybe others have had different experiences. But
comment to what he said. I think that the element to which that Trevor is mentioning is the relationship that an individual has with the Holy Spirit, which is an entity within the Christian faith. And so when you are the Bible people wouldn't even have access to the Bible until, not too long ago, just a few hundreds of years ago. So, what I always like to ask people is, before the Bible became, massively available to everybody, what was there? How do we live our lives? And the answer to that question is your reliance on the Holy Spirit. So the Bible is going to give you, kind of like a foundation, but at the end of the day, your trust and faith is not 100% on just the papers. Your trust and faith is 100% on God, on the Holy Spirit who will guide you through the Bible. So I always like to tell people and advocate to people, let prayer be where you start in that relationship and the communication that you have with God, and He will guide you through what you need to realize through the Bible and through the scriptures and so on and so forth. And so the Christian faith, I can't speak for every religion out there, but the Christian faith really is nothing without relationship with the Holy Spirit, without relationship with God. And the Bible is provided to us as a tool to support us. But without the Holy Spirit, without that relationship, it's easy to have confusion. It's easy to be misled. It's easy to not know where to go, not know where to turn. But the Holy Spirit, having that relationship in your own heart and within your own life, is where that value lies, to be able to guide you through understanding what the Bible is supposed to be showing to you on your everyday life.
Mm-hmm. So Eric, when we talk about death by suicide, we usually talk about mental illness. Now, mental illness is an illness. Why do you think that it's the only illness that is judged and shamed and criticized from the science perspective?
Yeah, I think to a large degree it's because you can't see it. we always talk about it. If someone has a broken arm, what does everybody do? They run up and they sign the cast. And they're offering condolences and, oh, I hope you feel better soon. And when someone is suffering from anxiety or depression, you can't see it physically on them. And I think that makes it harder for people to identify with or to understand, unless they've experienced some of that challenge themselves. So I mean, I don't know. I think some of it has to do with how we perceive illness, and if we can see that something isn't right or it's broken, it's very easy to say, okay, that's a health issue. But if it's something that affects us in a different type of way, it's not always so easy to identify in that way, and then we might project onto that other beliefs or other thoughts or other constructs to explain what we observe. So that would be my short answer,
Okay.
I think.
So do you believe that mental illness is a choice?
No, absolutely not. I don't know anybody who would choose to feel depressed or anxious or to experience hallucinations when other people aren't experiencing them. I can't imagine. I've never talked to somebody who I'm treating who has said, yeah, I chose this, or I wanted this. So my experience with that is a big zero.
Yeah. So then when we talk about the psychology, as a psychologist or psychiatrist, and we talk about that, if mental illness isn't a choice, then how can our choice of the way we died be considered a choice? Because we could have cancer, and that's not a choice, but we can have cancer, and we can choose not to have radiation or treatment. I don't want to go through all of that. I would just rather die. Now, that's not considered suicide. That's considered cancer. So what is the difference?
I don't think there's a difference, Bonnie, and I hope that's one of the things that, one of the messages that we can bring forward is this isn't a choice. And for some individuals, when that depression gets so bad, they don't feel like there's a choice. There's no hope. There's no other options left. And, we talk about pain being a common factor, and I think physical pain, emotional pain, when it gets to be so intense that it's beyond what someone can bear, sometimes the only way out is, or the sense that the only way out is via suicide, and I think people get pushed to that point.
Yeah. I mean, it is one of our beliefs that pain is the common denominator of all suicides. Without pain, would there be any suicides? We don't talk enough about the amount of people that have suicidal thoughts and suicidal actions due to the pain or fear that they're living with. So where does the pain or fear come from that is making us have those suicidal thoughts and actions? Well, it comes from fear. There's a drunk driver that it has to go to jail. Well, guess what? Doesn't want to go to jail. So he thinks that life will be better, people would be better off without him. Bullying, isolation, financial devastation, physical pain, all of these things that aren't mental health illnesses can cause suicidal thoughts and suicidal actions. And that's why all of us, it's so important that if you know somebody that's going through pain, that's a red flag. That's the first red flag. We are all at risk because we all have had we've all had heartache. We've maybe all worried about our financial situation. We could have an addiction that we're hiding. That's fearful, but there's always hope. So how do we bring this type of awareness and conversation into the church in updating the conversations and the narratives?
I'll go first. There are, and I don't know if you're going to get to this question later, but if you are, I'll just answer it. But I will say that there's a lot of progress that's been occurring as of lately within various churches to to address that point that you make, Vani. And in particular, for example, some churches have contracted and even gone to the extent of hiring certain psychologists as a member of their staff, or putting together certain events within the community, and calling and contracting some psychologist or some other form of clinician, a social worker, to speak to their congregation about the topic of suicide, and about the topic of mental health, and about how we can care for our mental health, and how to address pain, and so on and so forth. And so I think that that's very progressive. I think those are great steps that the church is making to address a point that Trevor made earlier, to know our boundaries and respect those boundaries, and to contract where we don't specialize in. So I think that there are some great steps that are being made, and obviously there's lots of work that's still needed to be done as well.
If I could say a word with that, humility from clergy people to understand that no amount of community support, no amount of prayer, no amount of Bible reading, no amount of attending church, no amount of revivals, no amount really of anything can do what he can do with the power of a script, right? It doesn't work that way. Now, I'm not saying those things aren't good and they can't supplement and support, but recognizing that, okay, what this community of faith offers as a form of healing and recovery and moving forward, there are limits. And recognizing that early, I know I said this earlier, but I'm just rephrasing it, and being able to refer, in the process of getting an academic education, I got a master's of divinity, and we give lots of crash courses in counseling, and the summary of those courses is always refer to actual experts, and I don't know if you want to add to that or.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Knowing one's limits. I'm not a theologian, so if I have questions about somebody's faith or faith journey, or I will try to refer them to the clergy person who is most closely affiliated with their faith journey, and I'm very happy to say, you need somebody with more expertise than I have, and I'll often, the other example I'll give is, like, if my car is broken down, or your car is broken down, I'm not your guy. You better take it to a mechanic, because if you want me to fix the brakes, guess what? Your car is going to run off the road. So it is really important, I think, to understand what our limits are, where our areas of expertise are, and then to share the responsibility. I will say too, Vani, to your point, I do see some progress within churches. The church that my family attends, we will pray routinely in the congregation, the big congregation, everybody in the church. We'll pray for the people who have cancer and who have heart disease, and for people who have depression and suffering with anxiety or other mental health conditions. It's part of the prayer that we give almost every week, I would say. So I have hope that we're going to get there, that with continued conversations like this, we'll raise awareness, we'll be able to talk about these things and answer questions that we have. And the ultimate goal is to better support the people in our lives, in our congregations, or in our neighborhoods, or in our families, so they can get the help that they really need.
Do you think we'll ever get to the point where we're going to be talking about the illness rather than the act? We don't, I say I lost my husband to depression because I can talk about the illness rather than the act. Because when I say suicide is the dark and scary word. Do you think that if we were able to get more people and make it a common language of the illness, depression, anxiety, addiction, whatever it may be, it will change the paradigm of it, right?
I'm absolutely hopeful. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when, at least in my community, when somebody in our community of faith developed cancer, we used to talk about it in hushed voices. You know, we'd say, so-and-so has cancer. And, you know, we didn't quite know what to do. We didn't want to necessarily catch it, you know, from them. And so we were very cautious about that. And there was a lot of stigma around a cancer diagnosis. And that's changed. I mean, I don't know of anyone who thinks about cancer in that way any longer. And I'm very hopeful. I see, you know, I think young people as they're growing up are much more willing and open to talk about their struggles, whether it's mental health or addiction or other things. They're much more willing to talk about it. And we have to seize on that and say, you're right, let's talk about it. You know, this is something that we need to discuss. We should talk about. We should support each other. So maybe I'm naive, but I'm hopeful, Bonnie, that we're going to get there.
We're not naive. We're forward. You know, we're forward thinking. Did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I think that you might get to this later.
Okay.
I'm not sure, but it was on the topic of the relationship between how, you know, so religion or faith can affect and influence the mental health, you know, a person's mental health and so on and so forth. Because some of the conversation was kind of intriguing, some thoughts, but I think if you're going to get to that, we can postpone.
Well, if you have something you want to talk about now, go ahead.
You know what? We'll just postpone
Okay,
it.
we'll get there. We'll get there.
We'll get there.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
I do think there is a generational shift, and I, you know, without giving away ages or anything like that, the students, you know, that I have the pleasure of teaching that are 18 to 22, they think in much more nuanced and careful ways about mental illness and the topic of suicide than I did when I was 18 to 22. And so I think the army that is behind what you're doing, Bonnie, is growing, and there is an age difference.
Yeah, good. I'm feeling it too.
Yeah.
I'm feeling it too. But one thing that comes to mind is when we are changing, and the reason, the stigma and the judgment that is still very prevalent is the shame. Why is there so much shame surrounding mental brain health illnesses?
I think it just goes back to education. You know, shame, I think, comes from ignorance. And ignorance comes from a lack of knowledge. A lack of knowledge comes from a lack of education. So I think it just comes down to we need to become educated more and more. That's one thing we're doing here with I Understand is we're pushing education. We're trying to teach. We're trying to enlighten people and into this reality of the definition petition and so on and so forth. So I think that it comes all the way down to educating ourselves and continuing to educate others so that we can all have a broader understanding of this important yet misunderstood topic.
Well, with the shame, you know, wonder if it's me. And, you know, I don't want to talk about my situation because it's embarrassing. As and for my mental health, what does that do to my mental health if I'm not going to live my truth? Because so many can't, because they're embarrassed, ashamed, or some are in fear that they're going to lose their job because they're suffering from anxiety or an addiction.
I mean, as I was going through training to become a psychiatrist, one of the things that I came to appreciate is when you've got a secret and it's something that you don't feel like you can share, there's this tremendous psychological pressure that builds, and that's not good for us. So if there's something where we're feeling embarrassed or shamed, we're feeling some shame about it, whether it's right or wrong, the most important thing that I encourage people to do is to find somebody they can trust who they can talk with about it, because that is going to release some of that psychological pressure. As soon as you share something, you're not alone with it anymore. And that's incredibly important and incredibly powerful. And so, you know, instead of the problem doubling, it's cut in half. And then you share it with someone else and it's cut in half again. And then they feel like they're not alone. So then maybe they're able to share their story or to talk about what's happened in their life. And then they're not alone with with the issue that they're dealing with. So this is one of the reasons I believe so strongly, and I understand, because we're bringing these conversations, and there's so much need to talk about what's going on and to share what's happening. And it's so incredibly powerful for us to be able to do that. And so that's why I applaud Vani, because she's bringing this conversation to so many people and making it okay to talk about by being vulnerable herself and sharing her story.
Yeah, thank you.
I think it's also important to note that the genders experience emotions and outlets and shame in different ways. And speaking from the masculine side, there are a lot of myths about masculinity. You know, the strong, silent type who can endure anything, that doesn't ever talk and holds things in, you know, and can just do anything, and the kind of the John Wayne brain or something along those lines. And thankfully, there are individuals in prominent places, professional athletes, politicians, and others, who are talking openly and honestly from the masculine perspective about the importance of sharing, the importance of community, the importance of not just carrying everything alone. And again, recognizing that based upon the way society divides us according to gender, we may experience these things differently. And one or the other gender may need more help in certain ways of coming out of the cocoon or the shell or the shame and talking.
So when we look at that shame as being a, why are we shaming ourselves or our loved one that has passed if they had an illness, right? That they didn't have control of or they didn't get sick of, right?
Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Does the shaming of individual choices in some religious communities add to the stigma of suicidal ideation?
Yes. I mean, to answer it simply, it's yes, it does, and it's and I think personally, just it talks to the previous statement that was made about how there are unfortunately these sacred cows. That's what I like to call them. And for those who don't know what a sacred cow is, it's a religious myth that has been held throughout the generations that has no biblical basis, but it's a religious myth. And so there are these sacred cows that are had, have been believed, and I think that that's what ties to the shame. It's my thoughts on that.
Jump in.
You good?
I mean, the shame game is tricky, right? And it's not that dissimilar in religious communities to what now is also happening with cancel culture, right? That you've done something and therefore you are so outside the box of whatever we are that you are no longer a part of that. And anytime I think an individual is distanced from their people or their group for reasons they may or may not understand or may not deserve, they're going to experience, loneliness and shame and being ostracized and all of those sorts of things, for sure.
One of the things that really breaks my heart is those that, the second leading cause of death to ages 10 to 34 is suicide. And what saddens me is the LGBTQ community are at one of the highest risks. There's 1.8 million LGBTQ youth seriously consider suicide each year. How can these cultural differences, such as LGBTQ, be positively impacted through religion? Because right now, there's many churches that are not accepting or performing marriages or.
Yeah. And I will just say, first of all, this is a challenging topic. I will first of all acknowledge that. And with acknowledging that, I won't shy away from it because I believe that although it's a challenging topic, personally, when addressing topics such as LGBTQ community and such as, I think race as well, there's a variety of different societal current topics and so on and so forth. Personally, I like to stand on the foundation of love. And what I mean by that is when you look at the Bible is very clear that love is really the summary of everything within the law. Is love your neighbor as you love yourself. Love God first with all your heart, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. So personally, the way I address these challenging topics is I stand on the foundation of love. And when I stand on the foundation of love, it gives me a proper perspective. And then it gives me, so for example, like to be a little bit more practical, well, it's not loving if I'm showing more favor to one person because of their race than another. And if I'm treating one race less than another, if I'm being hateful against one ethnicity versus another, well, that's not love, is it? If I'm refusing to provide care or need or support, whatever it might be, to a person due to their sexual orientation, well, that's not love, is it? So personally, for me, how I address certain topics such as this is I just stay in love. And for me, I find that gives me a proper guidance and a compass almost in knowing how to address every topic that might be present within our world, personally.
Well, and I would just add, this is one where I think science and Martin's worldview kind of align. There have been studies that show that if there's a LGBTQ youth who is struggling or they're struggling with gender identity, if there is just one adult who comes along and is supportive of them, their risk of mental health problems, suicide, decreases precipitously. So for us not to support and advocate for supporting young people who are struggling with this, I think is, it's putting them at increased risk. And as a mental health professional, I can't advocate for that.
Yeah. Well, on that, Eric, in my research, it said that 1 of 3 parents accept their child as gay. So look at 1 of 3. That's just not, that's why these suicide, I mean, there's a LGBTQ youth every 45 seconds attempts suicide because often they're not accepted. No. So Trevor, I want to go to what the Bible says. And what the Bible says, according to what I have found, the main verse in the Bible is against homosexuality, but it's not against 2 people that love each other in a relationship. It is an adult male having sex with a boy. Is that accurate?
Complicated topics. Let me affirm what both of these gentlemen said. In that, I mean, from the bottom up, just the simple phrase "love first." Whether you're a parent or someone who knows, or just observing young people who may not be your family member or friend, but you see them in religious communities, and I mean, the data is clear that if there's someone who just loves people, you know, in their situation, the topic of religious communities, and in particular the Christian community, and the topic of sexuality is complicated, and we could have whole discussions about that. Let me just, this is not a shameless plug for me, but I'm a part of a project called 1946, which is a documentary film that has just been made and is being shown in private festivals. That is about 1946 is an important year because that's the first time that the word homosexual got introduced into an English Bible, and it's had a long-standing sort of ripple effect on what people think the Bible does or does not say. As a student of the ancient world and one who works with Greek texts, etc., I often tell people that there's a reason why biblical translators avoid the word depression when translating the Bible, because it involves a lot of cross-cultural diachronic, that is through time action, where you're taking what is a pretty specific diagnosis, right, about what's going on chemically, and if you attach that word to someone who lived 2,000 years ago or 2,500 years ago, you run the risk of anachronism. That is, you're taking a modern idea and importing it into the ancient world. why am I bringing that up now? Well, I would say, and I think many other people would say, that ancient sexuality is very, very complicated. It does not easily map onto our modern categories, and I would argue whether you're translating the philosopher Seneca, or you're translating the Homeric epics, or whether you're translating the Quran, or whether you're translating the Bible, that you should never use the word homosexual in rendering those texts, because you're causing more harm than good by confusing what those texts are. We could have a whole nother session about some pretty complicated Greek words. The one that gets debated a lot is arsenokoites, which literally means man in bed. What exactly does that mean when you put those together? And religious communities are divided, but in terms of going back to the original question, which you kind of piggybacked on, I mean, love first from the bottom, and then push down from the top at the level of translation, church bodies, church leaders, to create humility and understanding about what the text does or does not say, so that things do not get then taught to people who have these mental health crises that could result in the loss of life. Kind of a dual move. I don't know if I answered your question adequately, but
It's a heavy topic. And I think that we go with the bottom line
Yeah.
is, what all of you said, love, right? And like Eric said, it takes one, it's what we say all the time, and I understand, it takes one person to understand. Be the one for someone. But sometimes that someone is you. You have to speak out. You have to be able to live your truth. You have to be able to live and find your community of support, whatever the issue is. So thank you. Any closing comments on that topic? Everybody's good with that.
Love first.
love first.
Well, so how can your religious beliefs help positively support your mental health?
I will say that I'll answer the question by giving an example. I used to work at Pine Rest Christian Mental Health Services. I was more so in the administrative area, so I didn't get a lot of chance to have a personal interaction with the patients, the clients. But on rare occasions, I did. And out of the times that I've had where I actually got a chance to be interactive with the patients, so one memory sticks out more than any. And there's this lady who she had just got out of the partial hospitalization day program, and I was working at the front desk, and she was waiting for her ride in the lobby, and so on and so forth. And we sparked a great conversation, and turned out she was a Christian, and I'm a Christian, and she, really, really strong believer in Jesus too. And she was like all crazy about Jesus, and I'm like, yeah, I'm crazy about Jesus too. And so here we just started having this really deep conversation, and we just became really close friends, and so on and so forth. And sure enough, throughout time, as our relationship grew, I almost became like a spiritual figure to her, a spiritual leader to her, to the extent that she went as far as to put me as on her aftercare plan at the hospital. Me, talk to Martin, because he's the one who encourages me. And so and so our conversations went as far as, I would pray with her when she needed prayer. I would speak words of encouragement to her. I would teach her about the Bible, the things that were written in the scriptures, and so on and so forth, and the things that God was saying, through the scriptures, and so on and so forth. And she told me that it started to make her a stronger person mentally. She felt herself the pieces of her life coming back together. I always go back to that example when I think about that question, because it reminds me of how, your topic, the question here, faith and religion, if somebody does have that as a value system within their life, can be constructive and productive to their overall mental health. And so, we talk about the relationship between mental health and spirituality and religion, and how it seems like these are diametrically opposed to one another. And I always like to say, well, they can be very much so complementary to one another for an individual who does have that as a part of their value system. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think a community of faith can be incredibly helpful, and if it's a supportive community. So, you think about somebody who maybe is isolated or maybe they don't have family around, and that community can provide so much support, which can be really, really helpful and important. You can also derive a tremendous amount of comfort from prayer and from maybe singing songs that are comforting and talking with friends and praying together. So I think there's the potential for a lot of really positive interactions to happen through a community of faith. But there, as Vonnie mentioned, there can also be judgment. There can be a sense that, I'm not good enough or God can't possibly love me. So there's the potential for it to go either way. And my hope is that communities of faith can provide that support to people when they need it. That would be my hope, the ideal.
A healthy community of faith can cause as much good as an unhealthy community of faith can cause bad. And so it just underlining what they can do if certain things are done.
Well, and there's many different types of religion. And so what is the difference between God and a higher power? Because not everybody is Christian faith, or, there's so many different ones. What's the difference, Trevor, between God and a higher power?
Another very small question.
Yeah, I was going to refer to you. So.
Yeah, so the concept of God is, of course, a huge concept. I would actually argue that the biblical text, we're talking just about the Bible, has a slowly revealing picture of the character and purposes of God, and so God is not necessarily a static being, but the understanding of God evolves across the pages of the Bible. I think in a Christian context, when you say God, people are normally referring to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the Judeo-Christian tradition. That's what they mean as the referent of God. A higher power is more amorphous and meant to be more inclusive. It doesn't necessarily exclude the Judeo-Christian God, but allows someone to, for instance, participate in AA and believe in a higher power that may or may not self-identify as Jewish or as Christian along those lines. So one is just more inclusive, or even allows someone to say, I don't know if there is the God or a God, but I think there's a higher power. It allows you to sort of believe in something bigger than yourself without necessarily tying it to a tradition.
I feel like the younger generation is getting away from like the organized, structured religion and going more towards spiritual. I'm spiritual,
Right.
I'm not religion.
New Age.
Do you want to touch on what the difference between that is?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes into my mind is New Age. That's a big movement now. Is people who are, just like you said, they want to be included, or have some sense of inclusion, without being, in their mind, trapped in the institutionalization of what is religion today. And so that's why, perhaps they might be more apt to say, yeah, I believe in a higher power, but perhaps not, the term God, like many in religion like to coin him. So.
Yeah. Well, we're like running out of time. Yeah. Can you believe it? It's gone so fast.
Yeah, wow.
But what we're going to do is we're just going to take 5 minutes. If anybody has any questions, what we're doing is we're going to write them down. Molly, do you have cards and pens? And we're going to take 5 minutes to write a question. If any of you have questions, we want to kind of see what you guys are thinking. If you have any thoughts or comments, doesn't even necessarily have to be a question. So look for Molly there. Raise your hand if you want a pen and a paper. All right, we're back. We've got questions. Okay. Why do some religions hide mental health illnesses and or are ashamed of them?
Trevor?
I think that the short answer is because they may or may not know what to do with them, and also and this maybe gets back to the boundaries sort of question that if you think that your community or your faith system or your way of explaining God in the world can solve any problem and help anyone and rescue anyone and is really the answer to everything, then if you have a member of the community who, for whatever reason, is struggling or is having mental health crises, I don't want to be crass, but it's almost bad for the brand, and it's easier just to kind of move those pieces around. It's obviously not healthy, but if what you're presenting is that come here and all your life problems will be solved, and then you have people if they're not solved for, that's a visual problem. And so maybe re-understanding what they're doing as a place of healing, as a place of growth, as a place where people are welcome that are struggling would allow greater room for conversation.
And don't you think it kind of goes back to what we talked about too? If we change the conversation, if we change the narratives and we update it, we're not going to have these same issues. So when you go with your life and throughout your day, use updated conversations and narratives. Check out the definition petition, sign it. It costs nothing, but then live that language, because I think that's what's going to help reduce it. It takes one person to make a difference. So that's kind of what I think. We don't have to be ashamed of it. Mental illness is an illness, just like any other illness, and we need to start treating it with compassion and understanding, just like we do every other illness. Okay, being gay and how churches won't accept the person. Why churches look down upon gay people within the church when they, the church, will accept extramarital affairs between men and women. So I think that that's a really good question, and I think that if your church doesn't accept you, I'm going to answer the question, you should find a new church.
Yes.
You have to build your own community of people that are like you, that believe in your beliefs and believe in what you believe. There are many people, gay or not gay, that accept each other and will welcome you in their church.
Yeah.
But I don't want to answer the second part to the question, is why they accept extramarital affairs. You look like you have an answer for that one.
I mean, I'll just say, I think I like to paint a distinction between acceptance of person and acceptance of action. So we're human. We all have what makes us who we are, okay? Sometimes we do good, sometimes we do bad. Sometimes we are successful, sometimes we fail, right? This is part of who we are. So I like to paint a distinction between action and person. So when it comes to acceptance, I like what Vani said. If a church doesn't accept you, then leave the church. Find another church. There's many churches that you can go to, right? Or you can start your own. Start your own fellowship. Start your own group. Church is spiritual. It's not necessarily like there's organizations here and there, institutions here and there, and so on and so forth. A church is you, a person, is what a church is. A church is really summarized by a collective gathering of people. That's what a church is. And so I think it's unfortunate. I will say this is one of my biggest pet peeves within churches and within religion, is how there is an exaltation of certain actions and certain deeds, but there's not as much emphasis on others as well. So things that you do in the closet behind the scenes that nobody knows about, that's okay. But things that everybody sees and it's public, oh, that's wrong. You're sinful. I think that's wrong. And I think that's very hypocritical. And that's unfortunate that the church has become almost like a banner of, oh my God, I hate that I'm going to say this, a banner of hypocrisy in some instances. And that's something that I think that needs to be corrected. Because when you feel so self-righteous to the point where you can pinpoint somebody else's errors and mistakes and faults, and you feel like you're God to the point that you can do that, I think that that's when you begin to make a grave, grave, grave mistake. And so I just want to say that. I don't know who might have asked that question, but I want you to know that you're loved, whoever you are, and that you're accepted in God's eyes. And whatever, discrimination that you might be feeling with people, just throw that aside, okay? So that's all.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I like this question because I was going to bring it up, but we never got to it. How do you respond to someone saying their loved one had demons when they died by suicide? Okay, so I was in, maybe it was a support group or a meeting, and it was talking about a parent who had lost a child. And they had decided to tell the child that their mother had demons, which is why she died. Now, my youngest was 5 years old when she lost her dad. There's no way would I want anybody to tell her that her father had demons in him. Where does this word demons come in, and why is it used so much when we say, oh, they had demons? Because I'm sure scientifically there's no demons that you're finding when you're...
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Are you sure?
You're looking at me.
Maybe let me
Why don't you-
maybe why don't I try this one, the non-theologian? But I mean, to me, it seems like, again, using the text of the Bible, I'm just going to say the Bible for this one, to try to explain a phenomenon for which the Bible is really not designed to be, the definitive answer. So I don't want to call it over spiritualization, but it's taking a problem that the Bible isn't necessarily designed to answer, and trying to use it to answer that type of, that kind of question. And so then, well, what language is there in the Bible? Well, maybe it's demon possession, or maybe it's some other phenomenon. And you guys correct me, because I may be completely misspeaking here, but it's taking what we know and trying to translate it and overlay it onto something that we don't understand, and attributing it to something. It's a misattribution, to say somebody was demon possessed and that this is why they. But that might be the only language that I have access to, or the only type of way of understanding this that I have access to. I don't know. You guys tell me.
It's again complicated. The Bible covers hundreds of years. There's a very small window around which the Gospels, which record the life of Jesus, are written, and they reflect a belief that these daimons, or these daimonesses, which are non-human, non-God beings, inhabit people and do things and cause them to do things. If we assume that the kind of patients that show up and present to Eric with certain things that they hear or see or do or whatever, if we assume that basic type of person, that basic phenomenon of human behavior existed 2,000 years ago, but they didn't have all of the science that Eric has, like what do you do then? And it seems that, and many biblical scholars believe, that what the Bible's describing is not real, in the sense that they're not these daimonesses inside of bodies doing things and causing people to do things, but rather this person is having an extreme sort of mental health crisis. Now, with that said, that's a very Western answer, and there are large parts of the world, large parts of the Christian world today, for whom the language of demons and demon possession is very real and very active. I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's not a box on the Spectrum Health form or the Corewell Health form for the nurse to check demons, or like that's not. And so,
Not seen that.
yeah, not seen that. Okay, so it's where the worlds,
Yeah.
kind of interact. And I, if someone comes to me and they say, I think I have a demon, my response, refer, like that's.
Yeah. So we say the response would be, "What is a demon? How could how can our body have demon?" I would prefer to say, "Well, I lost my loved one to an illness, not a demon." So, okay. You mentioned about stats as far as LGBTQ, that it takes one person to lower the stats of suicide. If that was true, why is the rate so much higher among the LGBTQ community? Well, from my understanding, the rate is so high because of what we talked about. I mean, if one of 3 parents accept their child, this comes down to acceptance. This comes down to embarrassment or your own beliefs that you don't think that 2 people of the same sex should love each other. That's what I think. And I think that's really sad because love is love, like we said, right? Love, bottom line. So how would you, I guess, Eric, how would you answer that in terms of, all right, you said it takes one person, but that one person can make a difference, yet the stats are so high.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that speaks to how far we have to go. That, people aren't finding that one person, that one adult who comes alongside them and helps them through the process. I think, so it's a call to action to all of us to be more alert, to be more aware, to be more loving and accepting, and to be there for people, to love, as we would say, to lead with love, and so that's how I view that. And it's an unfortunate reality that we have more judgment and more shame right now than we do that loving component, and that's why the rates remain high, I think.
Okay, we have time for one last question. And the question is, I really like this one too. What do you think hell is, and why would someone go? Well, again, I'm going to just start, and then we can all answer that. So for me, personally, I don't believe in a hell. I think that our God forgives everyone, and nobody really goes to hell. That's just me personally. I know the Bible says something different. Sometimes I think hell is here. Sometimes life can be really hard, and we have to go through a lot of really difficult things, and we ask why. Why do we have to go through this? But it's brought up so often to those that have lost a loved one to suicide, saying that your loved one went to hell. What does that mean? It's such a good question. What is it?
So the Bible is written over hundreds of years. The Bible does not have a uniform voice on the afterlife, and it certainly doesn't have a uniform voice on the negative afterlife. And so most of what you call the Old Testament, or what we call the Old Testament, or scholars would call the Hebrew Bible, hell's not there. What's often translated as hell is a word called Sheol, which is a totally different worldview than what hell is. Hell shows up periodically in the New Testament in different places. There are other words that are used. And then the doctrine of hell just explodes through the history of Christian theology. Dante's Inferno, et cetera. And so you get all this kind of, and so hell really becomes this kind of mythic concept. I personally do not believe in a place of eternal torment and suffering. And I think different authors, and some authors don't ever talk about hell at all, and you wonder. And so what I would say is that before you assume there is a hell, and before you assume that such and such a person is there, understand why you think that, and understand that the people who wrote the Bible themselves had very different views on what happens in the afterlife. And that creates the kind of humility so that you don't say the kind of harmful things that are encountered so often.
Yeah.
And I'll piggyback off of what he said by stating that there are a variety of different understandings of what hell is. I think you were mentioning that. So, like the Jews have an understanding of what hell is, like he said, but even Christians have a different understanding of what hell is as well. So, for example, you know, there's scripture in the Bible that talks about how the devil and his angels were thrown into the lake of fire, and all those whose names were not written in the book of life were thrown into the lake of fire. So there are a variety of different theological opinions that say that, oh yeah, everybody who's going to go to heaven is already known, and everybody who's going to go to so-called hell is already known, and it has nothing to do with your decisions on this present timeline. It's already determined. But then there's a opposition to that and says, oh no, your decisions and your actions are what dictates where you're going to end up after you leave this so-called life, and so on and so forth. So I like to stray away from those conversations because it doesn't bring my mind in a good place. There's a lot of other stuff to focus on and worry about than just hell. You know what I mean? So, and you can get really carried away with research on hell, and I mean, theologians have been spending decades upon decades understanding what this concept is. So, like Trevor said, I don't think that there is one solid foundational understanding of hell. There are a variety of different understandings of that term. I like people to focus on here and now and live your life how you so will. So
Yeah. Well, it kind of like when I hear that too, it's kind of like, who are you to
right.
say that, and who are you to know that, right? Like they're not God, so how can they even say that? So it's just a wrong statement
Right.
altogether. So we're going to close by giving each one of you an opportunity to answer this question. What is the greatest takeaway you would like our audience to leave with today from this discussion? Eric, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I think for me, it's kind of where we began, that I think both religious communities, communities of faith, and mental health professionals both have things to bring to those who are suffering with depression, anxiety, mental health conditions. And religious communities can be places of healing, and I hope that they are. Unfortunately, they aren't always. But I would like to call forth the good side of both of these endeavors, because I think when you bring them both together, we can be of help to each other. And then the other thing that I would just say is, and this is one that Trevor has said too, is understand your area of expertise. So if you're seeking spiritual counseling or spiritual direction, talk to your clergy person. But if it's something that is really beyond what is in the realm of a clergy person to address, please talk to a mental health professional, because it may be something that is outside of their area of expertise, and vice versa. So those are the things I would leave with. So.
That's exactly my takeaway as well. And I would just supplement it by saying to clergy people that might be listening is that sometimes silence is just okay. If someone presents in a certain way and they say this or that is going on, you can simply say, I really don't have an answer. I love you. Let's get you to someone who can help you in ways that I can't, and not feel this compulsion to solve it. Again, sort of know what you can and can't do.
I like it.
Love first.
Is that it?
Love first. Yep.
I really like that, and I think that's for me too. Whatever your religious beliefs are, whoever you believe in, whoever you identify yourself with, just know that you are God created, whoever your God is. Know that you're beautiful, that there's always hope, that there's always someone that you can talk to, always. Sometimes you just have to find it. And remember, if you are struggling living with a mental brain health illness or pain, please tell someone, because talking saves lives. Remember to live your truth. The truth is what sets you free from so many things that cause our mental anguish that we sometimes have. And know that help is available 24/7 simply by texting or calling 988. Thank you all for being here tonight. It's been a great discussion. I am so honored, again, to be on this stage with you, listening to your wisdom, and am so grateful for the support that you give, not only I understand, but me personally too. So thank you. Have a good night. Drive safe.